Hi, and welcome to this session. If you have just wandered in, I will give a quick preview of what we're going to talk about in just a minute. But first, let me introduce myself. My name is Tim Peffers. I work at Philip Morris International. I'm part of the People Analytics team, and my role is a product owner for some of our advanced analytics products. So I basically manage and work with a small team of data scientists trying to really get deep inside some of our trickier people problems and doing some deep dives around attrition and engagement and strategic workforce planning and in this case well-being, and that's what we're going to talk about today. We did a large study in 2021 really trying to understand what is driving well-being and how potentially remote working and hybrid working is affecting both positively and negatively our well-being, and what we can do to really make sure that going forward in 2022 we can really make sure our employees are in the best position to succeed, have as much energy as possible, really take care of things like mental health, help with psychological safety, but also impact anything else such as physical health or relationships at work. So this is going to be a pretty deep dive. It's really for pretty much anyone. I hope that the topics we're going to cover are going to be useful for anyone who's looking at either well-being or engagement in 2022 and beyond, but also hybrid working, remote working. So a big focus of our study is looking at the impact of office attendance and tending face-to-face contact with colleagues, with managers, and looking at how that improves and impacts relationships as well. So hopefully there's a bit for everyone. As I said, we work in this project had a number of data scientists involved, so there will be some more of the advanced analysis for anyone who's super technical, but I will do my best to also simplify and give a few pointers to people who may be in organizations where they don't have an advanced people analytics team or don't have access to those kind of skills, but still want to do some analysis in this area. So I'll make sure that I can be as simple as possible. So without further ado, please let me take you into our first slide, and we're going to ask the big question: why did we do this in the first place? Quite a big one for people analytics, especially advanced analytics studies, because these studies can take 6 to 12 months. We have one study that's hopefully going to run for the next 2 years as well. So we need to be extremely sure that what we're doing is both very necessary and also is going to impact the business and the bottom line of the business. And essentially for us, well-being is incredibly important, both from a moral point of view, but also from an engagement and customer satisfaction point of view. So well-being within our, I think 60 question engagement survey is the number one driver for engagement. We use eNPS. And we've also done a study the previous year around the linkage between eNPS and CNPS. So employee net promoter score, do employees recommend us as a company? And our customer net promoter score, would our customers recommend us as a product, as a company? Essentially, there's a very strong relationship there. So if we can improve well-being, we can improve engagement, and that's going to have a knock-on effect. So all those people, those salespeople, those customer service people who are talking directly to our customers are also going to give us a bit of a boost in terms of perception, recommendations, and we also know that people having a higher customer NPS is also going to mean they spend more money with us in terms of additional products and so on, and recommend us and drive more users. So this is incredibly important and is going to help drive more sales and better customer satisfaction. What we've seen over the course of lockdown is our well-being has become a challenge. It was already a little bit low according to external benchmarks, and then as we got deeper into lockdowns, it dropped lower, and that's when around April last year we initiated this deep dive in terms of let's get into really the real drivers behind what is well-being and what actually is impacting at the moment. Is it things that are external, like lockdowns and COVID and so on, or could it be things that are happening within the organization which we can more directly impact? So that's when the project was initiated. And we started doing some analysis around, the potential cost, the potential ROI on the project, and at a very conservative estimate, very conservative, really not looking at, kind of lost productivity of presenteeism and so on, just really looking at sort of days lost due to absenteeism and even reported absenteeism. The cost of well-being in our organization was over $500 million. So really a big meaty subject, huge impact on the bottom line, huge impact on the top line as well, and definitely a strong business case for us to really put some effort in to understand exactly what is driving well-being and how can we positively impact it to improve productivity, to improve employee NPS, and improve customer satisfaction. So I'm going to talk a little about the approach. This is probably more of the strategic side and the conceptual side. If you are more into practical stuff, still hang with us because I'll be getting into the nitty-gritty next. But I want to talk a little bit how we've approached the problem, because I think a lot of people analytics projects do seem to stumble because we do some analysis and we don't know what to do with it. So I want to share 3 different techniques that we used that really helped drive some really data actionable insights. So the first approach was really around employee centricity, and this is really huge for us at Philip Morris International. What we're doing with our customers and trying to understand them, try to understand their pain points, try to understand what they think about the product, how we can improve their experience with our products, we're doing with our own employees. So customer centricity is becoming employee centricity. And the way that we look at it, Philip Morris, is really around this inner loop and outer loop. So we are a COE within the People and Culture department, and we sit centrally, and we are in the inner loop. And then essentially what we need to do to make sure that the actions and the analysis and the recommendations we're doing are going to be useful, they're actually solving a business problem, is we need to communicate and discuss and really listen to what we call the outer loop. And those are the people who are close to our customers, typically markets where the sales forces are talking directly to customers, they're getting feedback, they're trying to convert people from traditional cigarettes to reduced risk products, and really trying to understand what are the challenges that those salespeople, those marketing people, those, the people in our factories, what are the challenges they're facing in order to deliver high quality products and high quality experiences, and then we can help solve those problems. So for that, what we did was we talked to countries and markets and different functions and teams across the globe: North America, South America, Central America, Africa, East, West Europe, different countries in Asia. And we're really trying to understand what different countries and different markets and different functions we're hearing in terms of well-being, because a lot of these markets have already done their own consumer centricity techniques, such as, sort of focus groups, and already been talking to their employees around, what is behind this well-being, what do they think is happening, and why is well-being potentially dropping within this remote working environment. So we kind of took all those different ideas, all those different hypotheses around people can't travel, so people are not taking annual leave, people are, inundated with online meetings, people are working longer days, they're converting that, commute into, a longer working days, people are finding it difficult to disconnect working from home, all these different hypotheses around what's happening, all these different things that our actual employees were saying across the globe, pulling those together and then trying to figure out, okay, how can we analyze this and how can we test these hypotheses? So the way that we test the hypothesis is the second bracket here. It's the PSA approach: problem, solution, and action. So one of the keys here is we really want to make sure that what analysis we deliver is going to be actionable, right? So we don't want to take just all the data, analyze what's happening, and then say, here's the answer to the well-being problem, because it might be that the people who are really struggling with well-being are, adults or parents with young children. Because of lockdown, kids at home, it's difficult to work. They're having to be with the kids in the day and then log on in the evenings and so on and so forth, which might be true, but what's the action there? What can we do about that? So the PSA approach is really thinking about what's the problem. Then the second stage is thinking about what's the solution. How can we intervene? How can we make a change? And then the action is the specific action that then we need to build a hypothesis around. Okay, so A simple example would be people saying, work from home, they're feeling disconnected, they're not seeing their teammates, the relationships are suffering. Okay, that's the problem. Well, what's the solution? Well, the solution is, meet face to face, get back to the office. Okay, but what's the action? How can we influence meeting face to face? Well, we do have, that is something that we can do. We have our smart working policy. We can, kind of advise people why to come to the office, when to come to the office. So if the problem is relationships, okay, are the people who are coming to the office actually, seeing their manager, seeing their colleagues, and then are they reporting better relationships? They reporting better psychological safety? Are they reporting, that they feel comfortable discussing boundaries, or they're having conversations about career opportunities, or whatever those things that were missing or went missing when lockdown happened, when our interactions became digital and instant messages rather than face to face. So once we start thinking about those actions that we can do, that means that we can actually then start testing those hypotheses. And if they're true, that's where we can actually recommend actions and have a data-driven action plan that's going to make changes, rather than having some academic research saying, well, people are feeling sad or depressed, or we've actually got some real actionable insights. And the last thing we really looked at, once we'd done the discussing the consulting with our outer loop and with our COEs, and then going through this process, is really applying system thinking, taking all these different hypotheses and looking at them as an ecosystem. Okay, if we wanted to potentially give everyone a day off and have a well-being day or 2 well-being days, we probably could do that. We could probably take that data, annual leave data, and test that and see if there's a relationship with well-being, and then advise that. But you kind of want to think a bit more around the whole ecosystem. Are people actually taking a day off and then logging off, or are they still checking emails and attending calls even though they're on leave, or they're on the beach and they should be spending time with their family? Are people actually taking sick days? Are people, or people pushing through? You've got to think about this as a whole ecosystem in terms of the different elements that all interact: relationships, psychological safety, sort of time, are people, working short days, long days, are people actually compensating their days off with maybe taking sort of Friday afternoons off if they don't have meetings, but informally. So we want to think about it as a whole ecosystem. And then what we come up with is a list of problems that the business is having, a load of actionable hypotheses that attach to those, and then we also have essentially the ability to see how they all interact with each other and what potentially could be driving what within this ecosystem of different outcomes and effects. And what we found was really we needed 3 different types of data sources. So these were all different hypotheses, and essentially the hypotheses in green were around relationships and working time, and we felt organization network analysis, or ONA, was a good way to study these, looking at people's email and Outlook and Teams metadata, and really looking at how they interact, how long they've been working, what are their behaviors digitally online, and trying to understand what are the behaviors that are potentially driving positive well-being, or what potentially could be driving negative well-being. The hypotheses in blue were really around the psychological part, or where we needed what we felt was a qualitative data. So asking people questions either on a 5-point scale or open comment questions in a survey. And then the last type of data was the purple data, and that's where we felt that we needed to bring in systems data to potentially test some hypotheses, partly because it's always good to have quantitative data to back up the qualitative data, but also because we didn't want to send a 150 question survey out to our markets and our teams. So wherever we could, we really tried to find some passive data that we could use to analyze, to really give us a really good understanding of what's happening and how people are interacting. So one of the biggest areas that we experimented in as part of this study is office attendance data. Actually, were people logging in and logging out as they were going through the turnstiles at the offices, or were people booking in some countries and some markets and some offices, were people booking an office desk and attending the office then? And this all gave us some really rich insights in terms of what's happening, what is driving what, and what are potentially some of the actions that we can take. So this is where we maybe get a little bit more practical, and I really wanted to give you guys some good insights and some advice, even if you're not doing a wellbeing study or you're looking to drive potentially improve wellbeing in your organization. So these are some of the things that we have found. We have many more insights. So if you are interested in more, you have specific questions, please do. I'll give my contact details at the end of the session. Please do ask questions and reach out. But the top 5 insights that we found. Number 1 for me is around the control over work. So what we did is we worked with our data scientists and we put all this data, all the survey questions, all our demographic data, age, tenure, gender, all these other demographics. We took all that email data, kind of how many meetings, how long were the meetings, how long was the day, how long was the distance between the first email in the morning, the last email, were people working on weekends, were people having one-to-ones with their managers, all that email data, all that ONA data, and then the office attendance data, and all this other data put in a big machine learning model, and we did what's called a drive analysis. Essentially, machine learning algorithms try and work out how to predict who has good well-being and bad well-being, and then this comes out as the top predictors in all our data sets. And I think the key takeaway here is that the purple, these are the top 15 drivers, and the purple ones are all survey questions. So one of our first insights, not really the email metadata and the office and all this other data, were people taking annual leave, were people taking sickness absence, they were not very strong predictors, or they were relationships, but they were quite weak relationships. Whereas the psychological side, the survey data, the perception data, the qualitative data was a much stronger indicator of whether people were going to have strong well-being. And particularly for us, the control over work dimension. This is part of a psychological model called Karasek's job support control demand model. I think I got that right. But essentially, his model looks at relationships in an organization and the psychological safety. But the main thing that drives well-being and impacts resilience is this perception of control. Am I in control? Can I decide how I do my work? How can I manage my work? And this is where things like micromanagement can really negatively impact employees' well-being. And our survey and our analysis and our study really just back this up. Things such as, am I able to manage my responsibilities? Do I have the flexibility to manage my workload? These are very important drivers within the whole process. And what's interesting is that things like length of workday, number of meetings, number of emails, the kind of more physical workload is not a very strong driver. There's still some relationships there, but it's really around it's really around control. So it's much more around people's perception and whether they have the freedom, the ability to control how they do their work. So this was kind of a first interesting insight that really made us look and focus on the survey as our kind of our biggest data source and our biggest predictor. And what we found within the open text comments and one of the questions was workload became a very big topic, which is interesting because the number of meetings and the length of the work day and the length of the work week were not particularly strong. So it almost felt like there was a perception that workload was very big, but actually it wasn't necessarily tallying with how much online work and how much communication, how much networking people were doing. So then we wanted to really understand, okay, what is driving workload? So we did another drive analysis, same as we did for the well-being as a target, but we had a question around workload. And we did a driver analysis around that. And what came out was the biggest driver for whether people felt their workload was manageable or not manageable, whether their workload was increasing or actually staying the same, was unreasonable deadlines. So people who felt they were working towards unreasonable deadlines felt that their workload was increasing. They felt their workload, they couldn't manage it, they couldn't handle it. We also found those other things related to it which didn't quite make sense around, kind of, well-being affected and energy and would I take a sick day? So we did an additional analysis, and this is probably the most technical and geeky part of it. But essentially what we did is we took those top, I think, 6 drivers for workload. And then we did something called mediation analysis, looking at the interplay between the different variables. So we know that they're all related to workloads, and we kind of think they're all related to each other. So we want to understand, which one's the inputs, what drives workload, and what might be an effect, like, not being able to take time off, or maybe your well-being being affected because of high workloads. What that came out was really interesting. It wasn't so much a cause and effect of workload. It was actually the mediators, the variables, all had a knock-on effect with each other. So unreasonable deadlines was the biggest driver around workload. If people felt they had unreasonable deadlines, they felt they could manage their workload. But if people had unreasonable deadlines, then that had a knock-on effect and they felt they couldn't take time off. That then, if people couldn't take time off, that then had a knock-on effect with their well-being being affected. Obviously, they can't take time off, they can't take a sick day, they don't feel they can take a sick day. Obviously, they're not well, their well-being is affected. That then has a knock-on effect and has a certain driver on performance, and then that has then another knock-on effect with workload increasing, which then has a knock-on effect with unreasonable deadlines. Now, mediation analysis isn't quite causality, but you can see that if you increase one of the variables, you'll then drive an increase with another. So this is getting quite close to causality. And again, we still statistically test each different relationship. But essentially, this is what we call the vicious cycle of well-being. If people are working to unreasonable deadlines, they start having these problems where they don't feel they can take time off, they get sick, they can't work, they're not working at the highest levels, they're not feeling productive, work is getting on top of them, and then obviously those deadlines become even more unrealistic and the circle keeps on continuing. And we're interested in this, and we wanted to kind of really look at does the data back this up? So the feeling of not taking time off, that was a question we asked in the survey, but we also looked at annual leave and absence. And what we found again is there's people who are saying they have very poor well-being, they have very high workloads. What we do see is that people are less likely to take time off sick, but also there's about, for everyone else who has sort of, not great to very good well-being, they're taking time off every roughly 30 days. Those people who are stuck in this vicious cycle, who are really struggling with unreasonable deadlines, the average time to take time off goes up to around 50 days. So you're seeing an almost 50% increase, over 50% increase in terms of this time between taking annual leave. So people have a perception that they're very busy and they can't take time off, either for sick days or for annual leave. So one of our big focuses here is really thinking about extending deadlines. Leaders looking beyond, sort of deliverables within the next week or two, and really thinking about long term, and then also thinking about working in sprints. A big discovery we had on our study is that we understood, okay, why are those teams that are working in a project-based environment doing a lot better in terms of well-being than those who aren't? And what we think is happening is that when you're working in that project-based environment, when you're working agile, when you're having those sprints, that you're pushing your deadlines to 2 weeks. That means that you've got a little bit of breathing space. You can deliver, say, 10 things in 10 working days. That gives you a bit of time to say, if I'm not feeling well, I can take a day off, I can catch up tomorrow or next week. It gives a little bit of that breathing space so people have the space to deliver when and how they need to. So that's another little bit of advice there. Another little insight is actually when we start switching to project-based work and we adopt techniques like Agile, that can help push back deadlines and that can help people manage their work, especially in terms of flexibility. So this is our third little insight. People who are working more flexibly, especially in this hybrid working environment, people working from home, people who are working flexibly are actually coping better with well-being challenges and specifically with workload challenges. So control is still the main driver, okay? Having control, as soon as you don't have control, doesn't matter if you're flexible or not, you still have significantly worse well-being. But those people who have flexibility and have control, they are coping a lot better. So those people who are able to work a long day when they really need to, and then take that time back when they're working, sort of varying their hours according to their workload, are able to cope much better with the challenges of high workloads or shorter deadlines. So things such as, sort of having a policy of logging off early on Fridays, we are seeing that having a really positive impact on well-being, because it's saying, we're not restricting people to a 9 to 5 or 10 till 6 or 8 till 4, whatever the core hours or the recommended hours are. But it's saying, hey, look, if it's working for you, working late on a Tuesday or a Wednesday or a Thursday, traditionally longer working days for people, that's fine. If that suits you and your personal circumstances, your workload, that's fine, but then take that time back on that Friday. Log off early on that Friday so you're not working long weeks and you're not working unsustainably. Those people who are not flexing their work schedules, they're the ones who are going to get really impacted when you have either a big project or you're coming up to close deadlines and they don't have that ability to then work in different hours in different ways. And this is also true for weekend working as well. We would not encourage weekend working, but what we do see is the people who are more flexible, and those people are also more likely to take a sick day, to take self-care, to get themselves back healthy, and then pick up the work and catch up on another day. Those people who do work on weekends, again, are able to cope well with those high workloads. So we're not pushing weekend working in any way. We're not pushing late night working in any way. What we are trying to do is destigmatize it. It's not a bad thing, but take that time back. If you're happy working a bit on a Sunday to catch up on emails, don't be afraid to take a long lunch sometime in the week, go out, find a friend, play squash, go for a run, spend time with family, kids, or whatever. But embrace that flexibility. Because when we think about working in a hybrid working world, people who, when they work from home, are a lot more flexible than people who go to the office. People who go to the office having much more stricter routines, regimes, much higher workload in terms of meetings. So physically being in the office, they're having more meetings, they're having more interactions, they're having more emails, they're having a much more fixed idea of what you do at the work. Whereas when they're working from home, they're actually flexing their time and using things a little more, and they have more focused time to then switch onto key projects as well. So flexibility, and specifically destigmatizing evening working or weekend working, if that is the employee's choice and it's their choice, it's in their control, that's absolutely fine. Just obviously take that time back. Talking about office attendance, and hopefully people who are working on their smart working or hybrid working or whatever you'll call it, working policies, hopefully this is interesting. So we did look at behaviors, working from home, working in the office, working, interactions, relationships. And what we do see is for some of the markets that we partnered with, they were able to, some of the employees were able to attend the office. So we're analyzing both those employees who attend the office versus those who don't, but also, the days that they were working from home and the days they work in the office, to see the different behaviors. And I think for me, the biggest insight is really around relationships. So overall, we do see the employees who go to the office at least, I think, 2 days a week, there's a significant jump in well-being. So that's what we have then fed into our smart working guidelines for employees across the globe. But the interesting thing was when we looked at, were people attending the office on the same day as their manager, and were people attending the office on the same day as their colleagues? And in the survey, we asked questions around relationships, around do you feel recognized? Do you feel comfortable discussing boundaries? And there were some questions around role modeling and so on. And again, what we see is those employees who are attending the office, who are having what we assume is face-to-face contact with managers, colleagues, and also even leaders, they are saying they have much better relationships. They are saying they feel more rewarded, more recognized by managers and colleagues, and they are seeing leaders as better role models. The peak for us is around 2 days. So again, that's what we're recommending, but the significant jump is really from moving from that sort of never or rarely to having a consistent at least once a week interaction or potential interaction face-to-face with your managers and colleagues. So again, feeding into our smart working policy, team days in terms of everyone on a team. There's a day per week where you go in, and that's where we're recommending you have some of those interactions, having those career conversations, one-to-ones, catch-ups, maybe some of those more informal chats that's easier to do face-to-face. Lastly, want to talk a little bit about role modeling as well. So we did ask in the survey a question around role modeling, and do you see your managers and leaders as strong role models? And I think maybe unsurprisingly, we saw that teams with strong role models tended to have much higher ENPS, so employee net promoter scores, so the teams were much more engaged, but also had much stronger well-being overall as a team. Not particularly surprising, but the strength of the relationships became super interesting. And then when we started diving into that, we saw the impact of managers and leaders role modeling to be really quite huge. So when we looked at, we took the Microsoft, the ONA data, the email data, when we looked at the relationships between manager behaviors and then direct report behaviors, huge relationships, really strong relationship. If your manager is the kind of manager who works a really long day, guess what? On average, so does the team. If your manager is kind of the manager who has out of hours meetings or works on a weekend, guess what? So does the team. Even things that were not behavioral in terms of emails and so on, because that could be job related, had a strong relationship. So we asked everyone, would you take a sick day if you were unable to perform your duties? And again, managers, if they were not, if they said they wouldn't take a sick day, very strong relationship with direct reports. Whereas if managers said yes, they would take a sick day, again, employees much more likely to take a sick day. And what we see in that vicious cycle is that taking a sick day, taking time to self-care is super important. So when we talk about role modeling, we really want to kind of emphasize that, don't stop doing this, please do as I say, not as I do. Employees do really copy behaviors, but also when you do things like manager does take a sick day and logs off and doesn't email you from the hospital bed or whatever, that's giving permission then to direct reports and employees to then also do that. It's making it okay to be sick. It's making it okay to not be well and take some time out, which is such a super important message when we talk about well-being and mental health. And it really has to start at the top. So start at the top. So I think one of the big victories of this project is that as soon as we finished it and released it, it went straight up to the CEO, and we had a really great Christmas message from the CEO before we finished the year. Really not about take time out and spend time with the family, but it was really about next year come back, think about how you can make people create an environment and an ecosystem where people can be successful, where people can work where they need to and get what they need done. So much stronger message around think about how your actions affect other people and how you can create the workplace and environment that's going to lead to the business becoming a success. So those are my 5 big insights. I'm not going to spend a huge amount of time on this, but I think one of the other things that was really powerful about the study was that we did manage to bust some of the myths, so some of these hypotheses and some of these ideas and perceptions that the different functions and teams and markets had. We're able to kind of put a little bit of pin in it, so we're maybe focusing people on the right things and not making action plans or policies that potentially weren't having the intended effect. I think the big one here is annual leave. There is a relationship. People who do take annual leave tend to have better well-being. But what we found was that if you think about that vicious cycle, we need to make sure that if we are going to give everyone a well-being day or sort of mandate that people take time off, we also need to think about pushing back those deadlines, because actually what happens if we don't push back the deadlines, but we say, hey, we're gonna close the office on Friday. Well, those people who are in the vicious cycle, they've now got one day less to do the work they already didn't think they could do. So potentially they're either A, going to work on that Friday anyway, or B, they won't work, but then they're going to be even more stressed when they come back. Whereas the people who actually have pretty good well-being and they feel they're in control, they're able to then move things around and they'll have a great day and doing yoga or whatever it is. So not saying annual leave and well-being days are a bad thing, but we need to make sure that we're also taking care of things like deadlines and creating the right environment so people can take a day to then work on some of those things, potential physical well-being, to improve their physical and mental well-being. The other thing about workday length, again, there is a relationship between workday lengths. We're not advocating people do 60, 70 hours weeks, but it's not necessarily a driver and indicator of people who are potentially suffering or potentially going to burn out. It can be, but it's much more around making sure that people are in control. They're not being driven to work those hours, or short, unreasonable deadlines of having to deliver everything by close of play or the next day, and forcing people to be working late in the evenings. It's much more around, if you stretch out those deadlines, give people the space to do what they need to do, they can then choose to use those out of hours time or those weekends to sort of do the work that they feel they need to, and then take that time back. So not focusing necessarily on keeping people within rigid working hours, but making sure that actually employees are not racking up huge amounts of hours is probably a good thing, but it's not the key driver here. We've got to think about giving people control and empowering them. So about hours working, objectives real quick, we had a look, see if prioritization really helps. It doesn't really. And then management one-to-ones, there was a relationship there, but those two, objectives and manager one-to-ones, our takeaways is much more around the quality of those conversations rather than necessarily having them booked into your diary or inputted into a system. So we didn't see a great relationship between the two and well-being. And our takeaway, and we don't know what the quality of those is, we're not reading the emails or listening in the meetings, but our takeaway is much more around quality rather than quantity. So I know there's been a lot of kind of bad news and vicious cycles and negativity around well-being and challenges. So what we tried to do is, along the vicious cycle, we tried to create a virtuous cycle, just to really summarize what we found and really bring home a simple to digest and very easy to action plan for managers and leaders and employees. So for me, it starts in the bottom right of role modeling. Managers and leaders doing, behaving in the way that they would want their direct reports and their employees to behave. That's going to create better relationships, especially in terms of having that face-to-face contact time, actually, going to see and having those conversations and that higher quality conversation rather than just having a standing Teams meeting once a week or once a month. But also thinking about driving that flexibility as well. So when we go to the office, we want to have that face-to-face contact time. We want to maximize, the kind of the quality interaction, whether it's around a whiteboard or having, one-to-ones, or even just going for lunch and having that social interaction. But when we're at home, like we said, people are more likely to work flexibly. People are more likely to take a sick day when they're working from home. They'll take a few hours out and then log back on in the evening or later in the week to catch up, and also working around potentially what people's responsibilities are. So once we start having that good home and work routines, we can really take advantage of both worlds. And that's going to be a lot of the groundwork for giving employees control, empowering employees to control how and when and where they work. But the other thing we've got to have is reasonable deadlines. If we don't have reasonable deadlines, we don't give people the space to then decide when and where they need to work, what they need to do, and when they can potentially or need to take time off, either as annual leave, also in terms of sick days, in order to self-care and make sure they are physically and mentally fit to work and at a high level. Once we do those things, then all the good stuff comes out. We start having much more effective collaboration. Remember, when people go to the office, they tend to have more meetings. They tend to have more interactions because we're there and we're into this 9-to-5 mentality, this present-y mentality. We potentially have less quality time. Well, people actually tend to have more meetings and more send more emails during those meetings and have more people in those meetings as well. So once we have that better control and that better relationships and that better role modeling, we suddenly have better collaboration with the right people at the right time. That's going to release that time and that capacity for work. So again, working hours and the amount of time you work is not the driver of the effect, but it is a relationship there. So once we have effective collaboration, we have more time. That improves quality. It gives us a bit more time, a bit more focused time, free time to then switch and focus in on that critical work. But that could also be quality time when you're not in standard hours. If that's the better place for you to work, or you know, you can do without those distractions. Again, we don't want to stigmatize that. We want to have quality time when you are in a good place and where it's right for you to work, and that's going to evolve into better quality work rather than sitting around on a Friday afternoon just reading stuff on the internet, but you know, you're worried that logging off is going to make you look bad in front of your boss. Okay, let's have real quality time. If we do all those things right, we unlock energy. This is one of our biggest drivers and our real goal around enhancing well-being. It's not just to be nice to employees and to make sure that, you know, they're okay. We really see productivity for employees as, you know, skills and capability in your network. So what you can do and, you know, the people that you need to do and leverage, but we kind of energy is a catalyst, and it's very much the multiplier that's going to mean that, you know, you're going to do great quality work. You know, if you have the skills and you have the network and you have the capabilities, but you've got zero energy, you're going to have zero productivity. And again, in the survey, didn't make one of our big insights, but people who feel energized, people who have strong well-being, they also feel they're much more productive. And they also feel they have a much stronger sense of belonging. And one of the things that we did find when we did that initial analysis around the business case is that there is a linkage between people's well-being and people's attrition rates as well. So if we do all these things right, not only are we getting better productivity, better quality, we're getting time back ourselves, but we're also creating a sense of belonging. People feel they belong, but also they feel they have more career opportunities. They feel they have a future at the organization. And once you have this wonderful energy and productivity and belonging, we know from the role modeling analysis that that is then going to spread. It's going to trickle down. It's going to set an example to those around you, and it's going to be contagious. So this is where we wanted the virtual cycle to really come in and almost be a contagious virtual cycle of well-being. So if we can get people, especially managers and leaders, taking care of well-being, becoming more engaged, becoming a bigger promoter, becoming more energized, that's going to be feeding its way and trickling its way down the whole organization. So that is all the time I have. I hope this was really useful. I know there's a lot of information thrown at you, and actually there's a whole load of other insights as well. So if you have any questions, please do reach out to me. You can find me on LinkedIn. It's Tim Peffers, P-E-F-F-E-R-S. There aren't that many of us. The other place to look for me is on YouTube. I'll be posting lots of videos there and a short series around well-being, kind of breaking this down into bite-sized chunks. But if you search for YouTube Random Walks in HR, you'll find my channel, and there's plenty of people analytics themed videos, especially around strategic workforce planning, but also employee centricity and attrition modeling and all this other great stuff. So please find me on LinkedIn, Tim Peffers, or search for me Random Walks in HR, and would love to spend 15 minutes with you just answering your questions and having a quick chat and connecting. I hope this session was really useful, and I thank you for making it through to the end. Anyway, have a great conference, and thank you very much. Goodbye.